This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. Today's episode features a panel discussion I led on December 12th, which was hosted by the National Arts Club. The topic of the discussion was the art of digital manipulation. In particular, the use of large data sets and custom programs in the development of fine art and the ever-evolving influence of artificial intelligence. I was lucky to be joined by pioneering artist Jason Salavon, who has spent decades working in the field of generative art and the use of complex systems of data mining to create works that are an uncanny reflection of our society. And now, my National Arts Club conversation with artist Jason Salavon.
Thank you for joining today's National Arts Club online program, The Art of Digital Manipulation. My name is Nathan Byrne. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Arts Club, we're a 501(c) nonprofit based in New York with a mission to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, theatrical and musical performances, and lectures and readings. For more information about the National Arts Club, you can visit us at nationalartsclub.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. On behalf of the Arts and Technology Committee, I am thrilled to welcome you to today's event featuring artist Jason Salavon and host and producer of Art Sense podcast, Craig Gould, with whom we'll explore the intricate connections between art, digital manipulation, and artificial intelligence, offering both a retrospective and visionary outlook to the evolving landscape of art. Following the discussion, we'll have a brief Q&A, so please feel free to use the Q&A function for any questions you might have. And without further ado, let me turn it over to our dear panelists.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. Jason, I look forward to this conversation, and it's great getting to have a conversation with you, an artist who works at the nexus of technology and art, and kind of use your body of work and your practice and your active studio practice as a jumping off point for a conversation about these topics. And so I think what would be great is for us to start the conversation with maybe you talking about your practice and allowing our visitors to kind of see some visuals around what you do and some of the ways that you've incorporated technology. I have a feeling this is going to be a very spirited conversation that can go down many different paths. And so, but let's start with you telling us a little background and having some show and tell.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really excited to participate in this conversation. It's a particularly interesting time for artists working with technology, and I've been at it for over 30 years, sort of dedicated to working through how one makes true fine art, so fine art for galleries and museums and those and sort of conventional fine art venues through the use of software, custom software, algorithms, data. So this has been my bread and butter for many years, and obviously these things have taken root sort of in the broader culture with generative AI, with the diffusion models that generate such complex and rich imagery, and obviously with the text-based models. Let me share my screen and see if we can sort of walk through a few projects and then sort of develop the conversation as we go, if that sounds good.
Absolutely.
I do want to start and just show something a little bit different, just to frame the conversation. This is a painting it's probably 5 feet high. And it hung above my bed when I was like 6, 7, 8. My dad made this painting. And my dad made lots and lots of um, interesting paintings that sort of melded um, uh, illustration, some Renaissance techniques, as well as a sort of um, 70s infused sort of uh, um, psychedelia and these sorts of things. And so I show this painting just to sort of set the stage for my own background being one of being around art, being around kind of adventurous art, um, and also sort of that exposure. We were living in Fort Worth, Texas at the time, and these kinds of paintings weren't flying off the shelves in Fort Worth, Texas in say 1977. Um, and growing up in that environment also kind of demystified art. So I had a particular kind of relationship. I drew and painted a ton as a kid, and so the familiarity with the sorts of ebbs and flows of making unusual painting practice, and maybe the sort of financial challenges in that practice, I think set the stage for me to sort of explore other kinds of tools fairly comfortably.
Jason, can I just
Yeah, please.
interject that
Yes.
there's something uncannily AI about your father's painting? There, there's one of the
Yeah.
hallmarks of AI is or the whenever it's rendering human forms is it has a bit of a problem with hands. And when I'm
Hmm.
looking at the hand there, I'm not sure exactly how many fingers I'm counting, but it doesn't
Yeah.
seem quite right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm sure. But the thing is, it's intentional, and so it. I think it's just
Yeah. He's
it's
he's
funny
he's
that
very
the
he's very good with hands, actually.
yeah,
Hands
and
are a
so I mean, I think it's
traditional
just
art
funny
problem.
the image is it's
Yeah.
very much in the 2023 zeitgeist, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add that his representational style is also kind of in sort of psychedelic style is in the wheelhouse of what current models sort of like to do. They're I think the optimizations that they're sort of geared toward have them sort of favor the novelty of kind of candy-like psychedelics.
Mhm.
And that is what's happening in this painting from the sort of, I'm guessing it's painting 76, 77, something like that. So yes, and I've actually never heard that observation. I think my dad's whole sort of 70s oeuvre would maybe fit in well with the current AI zeitgeist. I'll just show a couple like very early things just to kind of frame the conversation. I'd like to jump to more recent things. Um, so it's a simple thing. I made it as an undergrad, so I made it in the early '90s, and it's a 384 page book. I think I made it in '92 um, of all automatically generated sort of carpet forms, and I called it Carpet Maker. So I was in undergrad doing a lot of painting and drawing, and then I was also taking computer science classes. Frankly, I really enjoyed math and science and had some aptitude for things like computer science, but that was also sort of consciously hedging a little bit about career options and what one would do with a fine art degree. But I began to see the possibility of um, autonomously generating imagery content via software. And so I had one of these old 9-inch Macintoshes and a dot matrix printer. So this is like, just a sort of home technology from say 1992. And I would set a piece of software running and then print these all night and wake up in the morning to a stack of prints. And that feeling, there was something at the time, I'm in my early 20s, and there's something magical about like the surprise, like, oh, I didn't know it could do that. I didn't know that was in the realm. So these shapes or this style was in the realm of possibility. While this is a very simple algorithm and ultimately a kind of simple use of software to make art, it was really validating just internally that um, you could kind of guide this process and then in this case make a 384 page book which I still possess. It's cotton bound, so it also has a kind of like, it hasn't yellowed. I used acid-free paper and things like that. So that quality, that it's this sort of digital artifact from the early '90s that still remains an art object is also really interesting to me. That experience of sort of working as an undergrad and kind of discovering that it was possible to write software to make art really set me on a different course. And I felt fully committed to it pretty much before there were avenues to sort of continue study. There was a program in Chicago. I'm in Chicago now, a graduate program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I ended up going there for grad school in the art and technology program, where I was sort of working on 3D graphics and other things, but I kept returning to the sort of autonomous generation of art objects, or at least the guided autonomous generation. Like I felt like I'm guiding these things. This is now called generative art, by the way. This is sort of has a name. At the time, the term generativity has been around in the sort of media art circles for a long time, but that there is a label, I'm a generative artist, was not something. It's not something I would call myself now, by the way, and it wasn't something that existed as a term. In some sense, I was kind of I was sort of bouncing around between kind of two forms: a generative form, like this carpet maker, and something like a data manipulation, data visualization form, which, like, I'll fast forward just a bit. Say something like this is sort of archetypal. So these are photographs. They're collected by museums and owned by collectors, and they're sort of 3 feet across. They're these area abstractions, and they're also just a kind of literal sort of mathematical overlaying of homes for sale in various regions based on realtor photographs. So the whole suite is called Homes for Sale, and this is sort of homes for sale in Seattle, Tacoma, or homes for sale in the 5 boroughs, or homes for sale in LA, Orange County, or Dallas, Fort Worth, and Miami. One of the things that I sort of discovered, and I have a lot of affinity with the history of conceptual art, and I really enjoy building a kind of rigorous structure for a project, and then kind of following it naturally and not sort of over editing it. So the fact that the LA, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Miami all have sort of the vestiges of blue skies, that was not intended. That was not something I crafted. That was in the data, right? That was in the realtor photographs of Los Angeles. You would have this down here is a bit of road, because it also includes Orange County. So you've got lots of ranch houses. So the camera has to be pulled back far enough to get the full ranch house, and you get a little bit of road. And so the data itself, and in this case, data just means 120 photographs from realtors, or 109 photographs in Seattle, Tacoma. The data itself has some information that, when you aggregate it, tells more story about a particular region. That Seattle, Tacoma is gray, and maybe it's on a hill. This is not I did not intend this, and I didn't edit the photographs to make this happen. This was sort of in the data. So some of these cliches about the sort of geography and weather of these regions comes through in these photographs. At the same time, they operate maybe in some relationship to Impressionism. I'm interested in sort of that moment in painting, when painting sort of pivots away from hyper representation, driven away from representation a lot by the photograph, toward abstraction, and these pictures also sort of end up reiterating some of that just through the averaging of pixels of some data set of common photographs.
I would just interject that, this whole notion of, the visual representation of data is something that, I found very interesting. There's a website and a whole subset of designers out there. There's a website called Information is Beautiful.
Yep.
There are, noted PhDs like Edward Tufte that are looking at the visual representation of data and how do you, intersect art with data to bring better understanding to just a big stack of numbers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there has been, and it's not necessarily new. This like Tufte has been around for a long time. There has been an interest as I guess our civilization becomes more and more inundated with sort of dry numeric representations. Um, there's I think accurate thinking that uh, using images and video um, to try to give form to those numbers helps us understand and helps us grasp the world. It also helps people make arguments about the world. It helps people maybe even manipulate perspectives about the world. But uh, there's there's true value there, and I think people have mined it and continue to. My own interest in it is a little more um, ephemeral, a little more interested in the artistic effect, and then I'm hopeful that there's also some other bit of information that might get relayed underlying it. This it kind of leads me to want to talk about this project. This was a suite of four. This is called Shoes Domestic Production. I think it's sort of 1960 to 2002 or some range of dates. Um, and there are four large photographs. They're over 4 feet square. So this is a suite of photographs. Um, this is from the early 2000s, this project. And I, in a similar vein of a kind of conceptual investigation, I gave myself a kind of like a priori assignment almost. Take a sort of banal data set, like a banal tabulation of numbers, and make it a psychedelic. Like make it up, but be kind of truthful. But in my sense, I'm not interested in visualizing data to teach. I'm interested in can I make this banal data set into sort of an optical experience? And these are sort of accurate renderings of what the what the title states. It's the U.S. domestic production of shoes from about 1960 to the early 2000s. So it's literally each point represents a quantity of shoes of a certain type. The U.S. Census Bureau has tracked this kind of data, which Census Bureau is an underappreciated resource for all the amazing kinds of obscure data they track, including how many men's work boots were produced in a year in the U.S. versus how many high heels versus how many children's athletic shoes. They have 31 categories that are represented here. So that was my sort of goal. I'll show a video of it just to give you a sense of. This is a video of that plays with the photographs to give a sense of the form. So it's a three-dimensional form. Let's see if I can do that one more time. Yeah. So what's interesting to me about how this project turned out was that you can see this shape. There's a sort of volcano shape, a conic, an extreme conic shape. The base is the past, and the tip of this is, let's call it the present. And so this is a sort of really glaring kind of extreme document. So this would be the timeline with the past at the bottom and the present at the top. So it's a vertical axis. This then is a graph of the outsourcing of shoe production. So many people have told me after sort of talking about this work that shoes are not banal and shoe production is not a banal data set, which is point taken. But the sort of more important an unintended thing that happened with this piece is that it is a graph that has sort of pretty intense socio and political observations about the fact that we don't produce sort of common goods as much in the United States as we used to. And the extreme shape is just a natural outcome of just following the numbers and plotting them. And so I had this was unintended. I was not looking to make a piece that had a sort of political message or that investigated the socioeconomics behind shoe production. I had a sort of simpler thought about, using sort of computational resources to make something optically hot that was, in my mind, a sort of banal, data set. And so I came to sort of really understand that for me and for the way I think about data, it has its own reality. It's similar to the way an artist might use a still life or an artist might use a landscape. I think data has that same inherent shape than artists can sort of twist and manipulate and play with to explore information and meaning. So I think my project takes a few different, and this is to this day, takes a few different paths. There's the sort of the use of pre-existing data, filmic data. I want to show one more project in the sort of space of filmic data. This was a print, just a singular photograph, quite large, over 7 feet. And this is, it's called the top grossing film of all time, one by one. And I was lucky enough to have this work included in the Whitney Museum's Bitstream exhibition in the early 2000s, and it really helped to get my work seen. And the Whitney actually acquired this, and but the piece itself is composed of over 300,000 little tiny squares. That's all it is. You can see those sort of zoomed in here. And this is an entire film, every single frame of a film. Films are composed of frames. There are 30 frames per second, depending on what form you're watching. And each of these frames has been converted to one of these little squares you see here. They're squares that are sort of the average color of that frame.
Right.
So this is the entirety of the film Titanic, told left to right, top to bottom, like a text. So even though there's no content here, it's just pure color. You actually have a sort of like almost geologic record of narrative. Like this sort of blue stripe is Leonardo DiCaprio on the bow of the ship, I'm king of the world or whatever. And down here, this is like bad times. This is like where the ship goes down. So at the time, the top grossing film of all time was Titanic. And I did not choose, again, I didn't choose this film because of any special relationship I had with it. I was more interested in the sort of totemic quality. But I feel fortunate that this one, I think, turned out like optically pretty interesting. There's rhythms of ebb and flow of darks and lights. There's a variety. I never made another piece with exactly this technique, but I tried it on a number of them wishfully and never quite got this dynamism out of some of the other films I tried. And actually, while I'm not a huge fan of this film particularly, I do think that this sort of reveals something about like James Cameron's filmmaking. And I've had this verified by people who are close to him, that he is really thinking about like that dynamic over time. And, so again, this piece ends up being, while I'm interested in it as a sort of a abstraction, the way it relates to its original content is really important. And to your question about sort of data visualization, I was approached by film studios about licensing the software that I built for this piece for like use during production. That was the idea. It was a pretty big studio. It didn't actually end up happening, but the conversation continued for a little while, and I was always curious about what they would do with the information gleaned from, say, performing this on dailies, right? So do you add more gold? Like, or you add more? What is the plan? But again, it's a part of where the work is reaching across the fine art world into other realms.
And Jason, I can tell you, I've seen something similar, and so I out there in the retail space, there's someone who's selling.
I know about these things.
Yeah, they're posters, and it's a timeline left to right, and they've taken each of those frames or each of those minutes, averaged them, and made them vertical, and so you see.
Well, people have over the years shown me all the different things, but
right.
I will say, I don't know. If you look back, this project is from 2001. I don't think you'll find something predating that.
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
But yeah,
it's a beautiful idea, and I can tell you, I have appreciated that. Like not having seen this before, but having seen those other products, I appreciated the concept because I could look at Star Wars or Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you can see the hero's journey in color and value.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think what for me, like these averaging pieces and that piece were basically made around the same time. And it was because I was playing with filmic frames, the overlaying of filmic frames, the averaging of filmic frames. And so it was really natural for me to sort of vary the knobs. The first one of those was just literally taking frames from films. So you mentioned Star Wars. This is from 96, 97. This is every frame of Star Wars laid out by luminosity. So that experience of treating photographic material, film material, and sort of preconceiving of it as data. Like these are things you can rearrange. I think it was also influenced by sampling and collage, like these other ideas from culture that one can take as raw material, but instead of like cutting, and assembling, which I'd done when I was younger, now you have computational resources to give you sort of the superpower of laying out thousands of things. This, and I think when we start talking about AI, this all kind of leads to that. This my own relationship with, say, huge folders of images goes back to basically to the 90s, and the thinking about huge folders of images as sets, a film set or a set of photographs that are from a region that realtors took, or a project I did with Playboy centerfolds that sort of became well known for. So each decade of Playboy centerfolds has been averaged here. It obliterates all the content, which I was really interested in. Like it's obliterated, but you still see the figure, and then how the treatment of the figure changed decade to decade. Right, the kind of photography. You can't see anything here. You ask, well, what is this? Right. Well, this is the aggregate of a model whose head is probably turned away from the camera more often than not.
Right.
So that the hair is sort of central. So sort of demurely looking away from the camera, where by the time you're at the 90s, bright light, fully facing the camera, sort of much more direct. And that's a change in pose, a change in lighting, a change in attitude and posture to the question of photographing these models that's sort of revealed in these, maybe soft and atmospheric and impressionistic abstract photographs. So the I guess what I'm wanting to say about that is that this orientation that I developed toward thinking about data as raw material, and then specifically thinking about big folders of photographs, directories in Linux terms, but big folders you can think of on your desktop or whatever, folders with thousands of photographs. This is how AI now works, basically. On steroids. So instead of thousands, we're talking millions or perhaps billions. And I think I had some good fortune in that. My work was propagated on the internet some, and computer science researchers, particularly those working in computer vision in sort of early AI days, had seen this work and actually cited it and reached out to me. So very early on, I had sort of relationships with the computer science part of AI, just via a sense of commonality between an artist's approach to a big folder of images and maybe an AI researcher's approach to, a big folder of images. I do want to talk a little bit more about the averaging works. So this is a project. So I think I've done 8 of these averaging works, and I haven't done any since 2016. I think I'm through doing these, but they are one of the things I'm recognized for. And this was a suite of photographs called 100 Special Moments. So it's 100 photographs of the newlyweds, of Kids with Santa, of the Little Leaguer, and of the graduate. So these are sort of, poignant, really special moments in people's lives that one can find just and aggregate into these sort of meta photographs. And I have a sort of something I kind of want to show you guys. So this is a singular photograph from those data sets.
Right.
And again, I think this project is 2005, 6. So we're far away from AI, but I still call these things data sets. At the time, I was thinking of them as data sets. So here we are, sort of an average of five random photographs from this batch of 100 each, right? And you can kind of already see this this sort of averaged form emerging. And no special care is taken. There's a little bit of alignment that I actually outsourced to an assistant because I wanted to stay away from trying to overly determine what the output would be, what the final image would be.
Right.
Here we are at 25. And what I find really interesting about this is it kind of doesn't matter which 25 you choose. You're already basically at this form, right? So the convergence of these images into this sort of Uber form happens really quickly, more quickly than you would imagine. Now, if I choose another 25, there'd be variance. Maybe the background be slightly different here, but the basic structures are in place and they stay that way. And here we go to the full 100. And you only just get sort of a further refinement. And then the reason with these projects I've stuck around 100 is I like the number mimetically, but also that you reach diminishing returns. And so formally and artistically, it's not necessary. And then the other thing I added to this particular project was actually, and this goes into the nerd weeds a bit, but the mean and the median are 2 different kinds of ways of thinking about an average. This is the mean, this is the median, this is the mean, this is the median. And for this project only, I had actually combined these. But I do think the difference, so when people are quoting statistics, these differences really do matter. They really do. They aren't the same thing. And this speaks to that. The mean is a more idealized and airy thing. So the mean of something is not the thing, is not taken from the thing. It's a sort of invented synthesis of all of those values and average, while the median is taken directly from it. And that crunchiness is because each of these is a real pixel found somewhere in the existing data, whereas these are invented pixels that are an average.
Well, Jason, I was wondering if maybe we could talk about what it's been like for you as an artist who is passionate about technology and has wanted to use technology in all its forms and data. What has it been like for you over the last 30 years to find appreciation for your work and to find a home in an art world that has kind of clearly defined silos, right?
Yeah, these are good questions.
Can you kind of talk about how has the work been appreciated? Is the art world opening its arms a little bit more now, or is it still a world in flux?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I think my particular case is a little bit unusual I think, and that's why I like to talk about my own upbringing, my relationship with fine art from a young age. Those photographs I've been showing, I think they resonated with the regular art audience, maybe more than I would have expected. I've been represented by galleries basically since my late 20s. Have been collected by lots and lots of museums. So I think I've had a maybe an unusual path, but I will say it has not been an easy road. I think there is a lot of what I would say kind of knee jerk rejection of the use of technology. So it in the realms of complaints people have had about something like abstraction. My kid could do that. These kinds of complaints, those have kind of shifted into technology driven work, and ideas that if you're not making it with your hand, is it possible to be soulful? These kinds of questions, which I think are interesting and real questions. My answer would be, yeah, it's absolutely possible to be soulful. Um, uh, so I think but the other thing I would say is that there has been something like a stagnation in the fine art world, my experience, where things have sort of hung around the same kind of place for 30 years. So if you look at a something like the Whitney Biennial, a big sort of survey exhibition of what's happening right now, there will be a few token sort of technology driven artists and works, but by and large, the sort of traditional forms are dominant. Which I don't have a strong opinion about either way. I think I love painting. I love sculpture. I'm a tenured faculty member in an art department that is historically oriented toward sort of traditional forms and enjoy working with students. One of the things that I get the opportunity to do is work with students across sort of all fine art forms, which I really value. But at the same time, I there's something really, really interesting happening in our civilization at the intersection of visual culture and computer automation. And I do feel really conversant in that. And my own natural interests feel very supported by the fact that our visual culture is really about to change a lot, like the mainstream sort of visual culture via these burgeoning AI tools. And I do feel privileged to sort of be in have sort of been right there from very early. Did you have a thought or?
I do have a thought, and I think it may open the door to go to the next image here, and that is, I feel like our definition of art may be shifting, and a lot of times with people, I like to say that, in the 1820s, 1840s, when photography had its first advent, they say that it allowed painting to quit its day job, right?
Yeah.
And that it changed our expectations of what art is, of what painting is, and what art is intended to do. It became, in the 20th century, very much more open to less about representation and more about something else, right?
Yeah.
And now AI, I feel like it's a similar shift from the world of figurative painted figuration to photography. We're on the precipice of a different type of tool that provides a different visual language, and it feels like there is the prospect for a seismic shift. And I think in a lot of ways, how we judge art, what we think of as art, may change. And I know that some people have questions about, at what point does the art that is assisted by or created by AI, at which point does it become so slick that it no longer represents the natural entropy that is involved with the human hand, right?
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about that messy question of how is it shifting? What are we looking at?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the complexity and richness of that question. And I agree with the basic sort of premise that the advent of the photograph changed painting's relationship with representation. And painters were, it began to seem redundant to, or at least there was the new opportunity to explore crafting paintings that became more detached from the goals of sort of pure representation, and that they ended up having the opportunity to explore personal subjectivity and to the point where you end up with sort of pure non-objective abstraction. Um, the question of AI's impact on art, I think, is rich and complicated, and at this point unanswerable. So I'm going to be in the full speculation mode rather than I do not have the answer, and I don't think anyone actually has the answer. But my own speculations, one, leads me to maybe make a distinction between capital A art and lowercase a art. I think capital A art, fine art that's shown in galleries and museums, in art fairs like in Miami, that just happened in Miami. Capital A art is its own rich, socially constructed universe. And the objects that inhabit that universe there's such a plurality at this point. There are fashions that come and go, but we are past um, a kind of art that has a dominant movement, and then that beget the next dominant movement, as we had with modernism. Um, and I think that is influenced by lots and lots of factors, lots of soft factors, lots of really um, uh, different kinds of levels of transparency and opacity into what makes something work in that world. And so AI's effect in that world will be present, but I think I'm more interested in AI's effect in lowercase a art, which is our entertainments, our daily consumption of images and design, our experience with the visual world on a kind of day-to-day basis. And I have a lot of confidence that is on the precipice of radical transformation in very short order, and that I have an 8-year-old daughter, that my daughter will be able to make things on a tablet that would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, I don't know, 5 years ago.
Right.
So we're at a point where we're going to democratize the ability to create narrative and content, and that democratization, that sort of we're going to raise the floor on what everybody can make so much so fast that it's kind of induces vertigo, actually. I've taught a class called Art and Machine Intelligence. So it's an AI art making class. I've taught it for 5 years. So I've been teaching it, and I've seen this in the last 2 years, and particularly this last sort of quarter. We just ended our fall quarter, and I just finished this class. The kinds of work that the students are good, but they're not changing. It's not the students that are changing. The kinds of work that they created in this last quarter had me feeling a little bit of anxiety during the critiques. Like that students were able to create really, really rich, complex objects in, full graphic novels, full radio plays, full complex websites in like 30 hours of work, which, since I have a lot of experience in this space, these are things that took weeks and budgets. And so now you have undergraduates with no art making experience doing it instead.
Those are undergraduate students with no experience. And, It just makes me think. I was reading just recently about a product at Adobe Firefly, where they're taking, text-based AI, be able to create outputs based on the 200 million images that they have in Adobe stock. And it becomes a tool for professional graphic designers to be able to say, instead of saying, I need, to find photography, I need to commission a photographer, it's, hey, I wish, this is what I want, and something pretty close can be generated on the fly, and then the capability to manipulate it in Photoshop or Illustrator and have an output in 3% the time that the same project would have taken in the old days, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually quite familiar with that project, and have worked with have had collaborators who are sort of close to that project, and I know that I don't think it's speaking out of turn. They're more than that. They're interested in allowing, say, a brand to be able to have brand specific content sort of get learned by the model in a quick way, so that you're not just speaking to sort of a generalized model. You're now able to make
within
your
your
particular
guidelines.
yeah within and literally have your brand be kind of. And then what's important is this isn't cut and paste. This is fully synthesized, right? These images are that these models are making are have the full synthesis of lighting and content, and they're not yet really controllable. So these are the kinds of things that are coming, but there's already lots and lots of developments along these lines. And it is. I am I am very, very comfortable speculating that these kinds of tools, the combination of large language models like ChatGPT and these image generation models like DALL-E, or you're talking about Firefly, which are in a class of models called diffusion models. These two things, with whatever else is coming, represent the ability to make sort of photorealistic or fantastic content with a floor that's really high, such that literally my 8-year-old will be able to make some rich magic horse movie that's 5 minutes, that is compelling graphically, and maybe she gets help from ChatGPT on the story too, that has a surprise ending, and multiply that times all of our households, and everyone's making these like extravaganzas of souped up content that took studios that literally took studios, like 5 years ago. And then you wonder how that affects, like, what does Hollywood do with that? I have some questions and experience about that with that too. So all is to say, I think fine art is a little bit insular in that it has its own kinds of rules, and these things will surely sort of change fine art, and fine art will have to sort of adjust. But our sort of daily visual culture has no hangups about embracing these things, and I think that we're already well into the arms race for winners and losers, both from like companies that will sort of make these things, and then what kinds of experiences. I mean, I get really excited when I think about a kind of young genius who's sort of, in say mid-20s, has been steeped in this culture, grew up with the internet, inventing new forms. Like this is, I think, we won't just be looking at sort of souped up versions of our familiar forms and genres. We will ultimately have new forms. Maybe those forms have to do with infinite generation, and you just log into your movie that's always playing, or some degree of interact. It's hard to speculate. My own sort of response to that is to make, and I do want to talk about this piece, to make really huge things that can't be made otherwise. And so the last few years, I've found myself really trying to assemble coherent sort of things that are coherent from some macro view, that then have sort of really different identities from a micro view, via the sort of arrangement and composition of these kinds of tools.
So do you want to talk about this piece, Totem?
Yeah. So I think we're probably at Q&A. So let me. I've really enjoyed this conversation too, and I just want to sort of wrap up with something that's very new. It launched this summer. It's ongoing, and it's called Totem. That is an acronym for Tapestry of Decadent Meritocracy, and it's a project that sort of uses the latest tools and my own in-house software to make a 100,000 by 58,000 pixel that just is huge. We think it's the largest sort of GIF animation ever made. And it engages with blockchain. it's a digitally native object. So it's the first thing I've made that this one only lives online. I will do exhibitions around ideas like this, but this piece is an online work, and hopefully it all works. I'll click to it. So we're going to the piece live. We'll go to the Web3 mode. And it's an animation composed of thousands and thousands of small tiles that are themselves little stories derived from the Wikipedia and from the most popular pages on the Wikipedia. So it's got many, many layers, and it'd be difficult to explain it in a simple way. But you are looking at like 100-frame animation. I'm going to step through it. That sort of move in a macro. We're sort of pulled out, sort of looking at sort of an aggregate sort of painting that becomes photographs that sort of goes through all these spaces, and then at any sort of local, you'll have these sorts of stories. Sort of, I say stories, but images and sort of little mini narratives derived from prompts. And we're about to launch. I'm showing you a preview of something. We've updated it, so this is a new one that even uses sort of newer techniques. But I'm really interested in this idea that an image, a photograph, can do lots of work, right? So Kobe Bryant is also sort of forming this moon, right? Or this is Muhammad Ali, and this is sort of Batman serving as a negative space between his legs. This is and in this sense, I am composing, but I am also back to that first thing I showed. I'm always surprised, and so I'm acting as a composer. I'm trying to twist it. I'm trying to understand the capacities. I'm trying to push, but at the same time, I wake up and see thousands of images, and I'm surprised.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. I was looking at this piece on OpenSea last night, and you can buy a segment of the geography of the
Correct.
piece, and when where you have drilled down, and when you're down there are these kind of text fields that pop up when you roll over. Are those also generated just like the visuals?
Yeah, so it's a pretty Baroque process, but in this case, this prompt, the legendary musician Barry Gibb is seen performing in parallel universe, blah blah blah. That prompt, I had a whole other system that was trying to make interesting, rich, complex prompts based on Barry Gibb. Barry Gibb is in the Wikipedia. He's in the top 5,000 Wikipedia viewed Wikipedia articles. So we endeavored, this is another project I did a long time ago where I endeavored to rank the entire Wikipedia and made wallpaper with these rankings. This returns to that. So every little subtile here is a Wikipedia entry in the top 5,000 most viewed Wikipedia pages. So that begins, so sort of narrativizing like the Western culture's preferences and obsessions via Wikipedia page views. And then these other layers are things that I'm sort of imposing on top. Like I chose this photograph of Elvis.
Or is that Andy
which
Kaufman?
It's Andy Kaufman as Elvis, right? Exactly. And so, yeah, those things like this is, Andy Kaufman as Elvis is the label for this. So I did kind of I have enjoyed the opportunity to explore maybe a slightly more gamified universe, a rich, complex universe that would take some learning. The piece explores the distribution of wealth. So these big tiles are acquirable at a really different cost than these really tiny tiles. And so you'll see like all the red ones are about half of the project has been sold, and it's by and large the smaller ones by just people who've discovered the work. And so this is a really different audience even. Although for me, it's just another kind of Salavon project. But probably I'm really happy I got to show that as sort of the culmination of sort of work to this point. And I'm deeply invested and have a team here deeply invested in exploring the frontiers of what AI can do to make art and culture kind of unbound from immediate commercial concerns. So I really am. I am a sort of an artist in the sense that I'm really interested in just kinds of crazy shit. Excuse me. Might we do with these things? I imagine we're at time. I'm happy to take a couple questions if there are any, or
Sure.
continue the conversation any way you'd like.
I'm going to hop over here to the Q&A and spare Nathan having to jump in and read this. We have a question from Timothy Druckery. Your work in so much of AI depends on pre-existing images. Where do you stand on your relationship to intellectual property, an issue decisively in the news and in court?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I've made, from the 90s, I have sampled, and there is a history of sampling. And so I think culturally we should kind of acknowledge that artists and musicians have been comfortable with this notion of borrowing imagery from culture as a kind of lever to engage an audience, to make a comment. Many reasons one might want to sort of sample. My own interest is in discovery of pattern and discovery of underlying possibilities, underlying information, as well as like the sort of the transformative power, right? That there is a kind of friction of seeing an average of homes for sale, at first just thinking it's a blob, and then being told it's homes for sale, and then seeing, right, that moment of seeing something is really interesting. I have a lot of empathy for, especially more recently there are people who are not big corporations, who are not who have not made a lot of money on their creations, whose work is like being ingested by these models, and are rightfully concerned about, that their illustration style is inside of DALL-E 3. In a sense, it is, and I have empathy for that. The other side of it is that this is how people learn too. People learn to copy. People learn by copying and borrowing. If you go to museums in the middle of the day, you'll see classes copying the Picasso or copying the Raphael. So I don't think it's as simple as when models ingest an artist's material, that's a bad outcome. I think but at the same time, I have a lot of empathy for this problem, and I just think that it's kind of endemic in a world where we've all shared our material with one another via the internet, and now we have like scrapers that scrape all of it, and now we're training autonomous AI models on all that scraping. These just are we have built a really rich network system that allows our output to be ingested into some sort of global representation, and that can hurt, I think, and I do understand the pain of it. I was just going to say, maybe to be more direct, philosophically, I don't have a big problem with fair use, which is transforming photographs or someone else's sort of copywritten material and transforming it enough that you've sort of made it into something else. And I do think that making it into something else is a really important key. And I feel like it's a bar I'm really keen to feel like that that my work is truly engaged in transforming pre-existing content into something truly different that is a representation of me. And then I find my own styles now being either borrowed or copied, or models have them as well. So I'm also sort of engaged in this from kind of both sides.
In July of this year, I had attorney Dale Sandali on my podcast, who has argued intellectual property cases all the way to the Supreme Court. And we had conversations around fair use, the Warhol Prince case from the summer, and all of the complications and murkiness around it, and exactly what the law, what latitude the law provides. And at the end of the conversation, we did dip our toe into AI and what is at play there. And one of the tricky things that the legal world is trying to figure out as it comes to AI is the whole role of intention If you were asking the computer to generate this from these data sets, then who is the creator, right? And if you are not, if there is not a clear creator's hand in the creation, you are going to be hard pressed to have a work which you can copyright, which you can actually protect.
That makes sense to me. I mean, it makes sense that some native output from one of these models. You crafted a prompt to stimulate the model to return this image, but in some sense, the image was like implicitly in the model. This is going to get more philosophical, but it is what I believe. The image was in the model already. The model is sort of, these frozen models, they're not being trained anymore. They're sort of locked in. They're just so huge. Their potential of imagery is so huge. The interpolated space of possible images is so massive that it feels like you made the image. And in some sense, you found the image via your specific prompts and maybe some other settings. But I agree that just that image, it would be hard to go, yeah, I get to copyright this image, when the model sort of implicitly had that image, and there's going to be someone else will be able to craft a prompt very near yours and generate a very basically the next sort of neighbor image across whatever dimensions. And so I would sort of not be interested in people trying to sort of defend the images they create in these things. And in my own case, I'm interested in making something. This is not something that an AI can make, but it is using AI as some sort of tool to sort of make something that would otherwise not be makeable. And to me, that's the same as like, all kinds of new technology that's driven art making since the dawn of man. And so that is my own investment.
Nathan, I don't know if we have time to answer any more questions. And there are a couple other questions here that were great questions. I just for the sake of time, I just want to thank Jason for your work and being willing to open up and share these images. Honestly, Jason, there are probably a half dozen other topics related to philosophies and opportunities and threats on the horizon that I probably like to have another conversation with you on my podcast, just to dive into the headiness of those topics. And so, but I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation today.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the Arts Club for inviting me, and it's been really fun and gratifying to talk about, and I welcome any further conversation.
That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.